Having star players in the NHL is quite the responsibility. Figuring out their contracts, a whole lot harder.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everybody who makes Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Now that the playoffs are over, the sports have stopped sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster of bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. So today's episode, we're going to be talking all about star power in the NHL, and more specifically, how their money comes together. We're going to start in the opening segment with a philosophical conversation about why star players are always going to try and ask for a little bit more money. The second segment, we're going to take some time. We're going to try and figure out the actual math of calculating a given number. And then the final segment, we're going to talk about McDavid and Draisaitl specifically, how we could go about figuring out what they're worth, how we could figure out maybe a ballpark of what they're going to ask for going forward. So let's start at the outset. In today's NHL, and frankly, in any professional sport in today's landscape, you need to have superstars. It's not just good players. It's not just star players. You need genuine superstars. You need multiple top 20, top 30 talents in the world on your team. As many as 3 or 4 if you genuinely want to be championship caliber, at least in hockey. When you think about the defining teams of the last 15 years, you think about the Tampa Bay Lightning with Kucherov, Stamkos, Victor Hedman, Braden Point, Andrei Vasilevsky, genuine superstars. You think about the Blackhawks, Kane, Taves, Duncan Keith, genuine superstars. You think about the Penguins with Malkin, Crosby, Letang, genuine superstars. You could throw Marc-Andre Fleury in there as well with them. You look at Vegas, Eichel, Stone, Pietrangelo, Colorado, McKinnon, Makar, Rantanen, Landeskog. You can keep going. For the most part, you're going to need at least 2 superstars. The weakest link in this conversation, in this argument, is the 2019 St. Louis Blues. Alex Pietrangelo, the only player on that team that rises to this threshold. So it's really hard to get that caliber of player. That's what makes them special, is that there are only a handful of them in the entire league. So if you're a team that doesn't have one of them, you're kind of, you don't have a recourse. Your best recourse is to build the most thorough and deepest roster you possibly can, where you're going to try and have maybe not 3 superstars, but you're going to try and have 12 forwards, 6D that are really well balanced, where there's not a big fall off from line 1 to line 2 to line 3 to line 4. So with that in mind, let's start at this point. Let's start here. It is your duty as a star, as one of the best players in the world, to try and reset the market every single time your contract comes up. That is not just a you thing. That is not just a personal finances or looking out for your family in the future type thing. You have an obligation to the other players in the league to consistently raise your market value, because that is how contracts get negotiated. And we're going to talk a bit about other contracts in the second segment, so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But when you are a Connor McDavid, a Leon Draisaitl, Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, Nikita Kucherov, Artemi Panarin, David Pastrnak, you have an obligation to keep asking for more money than you got on your previous deal or the last star player to get paid got. And you do that because you are part of a bigger labor audience. You are part of a bigger labor group. And that raises wages for everybody. When a star player asks for more money, players on the tier below can ask for money that other guys used to get. And it creates a feedback cycle. It creates a growth proposition. And the NHL is still kind of in the early stages of economic recovery from the pandemic. If you don't know, the NHL salary cap is very simple. They divide the revenue by 32. That's how they calculate the salary cap. So they add up the revenues for all 32 teams. They divide it in half because the owners get half. And the other half, that goes to the players. That's how they calculate the salary cap. So you got roughly $88 million as the salary cap for next season. You multiply 88 million by 32. That is the player's share of the pie. That is why escrow was such a problem during that post-pandemic period where the league was still, some teams had fans, some teams had reduced capacity, some teams had full capacity. The players were paying off the money that they got paid, but the owners weren't, because the owners were losing out on revenue. Now, this upcoming season is going to be the first one with a significant cap increase in more than 5 years. The last time we had a real salary cap increase of more than a token $1 million was 2018-2019. That was the last time. And we're only going up to $88 million. When you look at where the salary cap is in other sports, you can understand the pandemic having such an outsized influence on hockey, because revenue, gate revenue, makes up such a big chunk of the pie in the National Hockey League in comparison to the other sports. That's mostly because the NHL has the smallest TV deal of the 4 major sports in North America. You look at the TV deals for basketball and for football, that makes up the large share of their revenue is the TV deals. The TV deals are billions of dollars per year. And because of that, it gives teams the flexibility to have more money in the system. Whereas the NHL, they do have better TV deals than the one they did, at least in the States. They have better TV deals now with TNT and ESPN than they did with NBC. You need to grow your revenues. And right now, the way we calculate revenue in the NHL, the best way to fuel year over year growth is to have big markets go far. You look at the Oilers going very far. That helped the NHL's revenues out immensely. The Rangers making this conference final, that helped the NHL out immensely. Those big markets that have big revenue gates, those are the tools to growing the pie right now for the way the economics of the league works. And unfortunately for the NHL, they are still playing catch up. That means these players, these star players, are not making commensurate with what they could get if the NHL's economics were different. You know, the highest paid player in the NHL, Austin Matthews, who we're about to get to, he makes like $13 million per year, which is like a rotation player in basketball or like a number 3 wide receiver in football. That is not a ton of money. That's like a mediocre, an average, a slightly above average middle reliever making like $10 million per year, like Trevor May, if you remember Trevor May, the reliever with the A's, the Twins, the Mets. That's the caliber of player who makes $13 million in baseball. The best player in the world is making $12.5 million in hockey. And the economics are going to catch up eventually. But in the interim, it does present a conundrum, because if you're a player, you feel that obligation to ask for more money to keep resetting the market, to raise everybody else's wages. But at the same time, it also makes your team's ability to improve the roster more difficult. It's why you've seen at various points guys willingly take less money. The Bruins did this for a while, where nobody made more than Bergeron. He retires, Pasternak resets that. The Devils, they've all been very conscious of nobody gets more than Jack, but Dougie Hamilton was an unrestricted free agent, so that's different. But now that there's going to be more money in the system every year, that revenues are going to keep going up, the cap's going to keep going up, there is the opportunity to really reset the market. And coming up next, we are going to talk about how you might calculate that money in relation using Austin Matthews, Nathan MacKinnon, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this episode of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. We're all driven by the search for more. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. One of the things I love about Indeed is that it leverages over 140 million qualifications and preferences every single day. Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit To get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/locked-on. Just go to Indeed.com/locked-on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insights on every team in the league. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can catch me and Hunter Hodes on there on Thursdays on the Locked On NHL Power Ranking Show, where we rank various things going on in the league. This past week, we ranked all 32 teams based on their long-term futures. 2 weeks ago, we ranked the last 10 Stanley Cup winners in order of how good they were. So if you are looking for more NHL in your media diet, Hunter and I and a whole range of experts from across the Locked On Network have got you covered. So players set the market. And obviously the teams, the general managers, the owners, they're the ones who sign off on these contracts. But when you are Leon Draisaitl, you are Connor McDavid, you're going to look at the market out there, and that's going to help you forge the number you want. You can say, well, I'm better than that guy, so I should be making more money than him. Then you got to take another step back. Well, how old are they? Are we in comparable windows? What years am I selling to this team? And some players have the fortune of popping off right away. And when you pop off right away out of your entry-level contract, you can exponentially increase your earning power. You can go from $925,000 on your entry-level contract as a first-round pick to $10 million in 2 years. You know, that's what Adam Fox did. That's what a number of these high-level players have done off of their first contract. You know, a year from now, we're going to be talking about Connor Bedard making $10 million per year with basically no hesitation that, like, this is a good idea. And when you look around the landscape of the NHL, you got to look at the last guy to get paid. The last superstar to get paid was Austin Matthews. That was last summer. Austin Matthews was 25 years old, so he had 2 more years of restricted free agency. He signed a 4-year contract worth $13.25 million against the cap. So that takes him from age 25 to age 29. That gives him the flexibility to go to market one more time. And the idea behind doing that, taking the 4-year deal for 13 as opposed to like the 8-year deal for 14, is that 4 years from now, when Austin Matthews is 29, the salary cap should be well north of $100 million. 4 years from now, it should be at least $110 million 4 years from now. And then at that point, Austin Matthews will be 29 years old. He can get one big contract. He can say, I'll go 8 years, but I want $19 or $20 million per year. That's the logic for Matthews' perspective to take that short-term deal. From a Leafs perspective, you're kind of out of luck. If the guy you're negotiating with only wants that term, you just kind of have to suck it up and say, we're going to have to spend more money on this later. And it's the same principle with a bridge deal. And obviously, this is not a traditional bridge deal to keep the cost down. This is a bridge deal because the star player realizes, oh, I have leverage. Oh, I can make a lot of money going to free agency next time. And the other one that comes to mind is Nathan MacKinnon. And MacKinnon is a bit different because Nathan MacKinnon was very underpaid for an extended period of time, where he was on one of the most team-friendly contracts in the entire NHL, where he was making like $6.5 million per year. And then he had to get his lick back, if you will. He makes $12.5 million per season, $12.6 million, if I remember correctly. And he doubled his money. And he won the Stanley Cup in the last year of his old contract. The Avalanche won the Stanley Cup. He negotiated the big contract increase. And now the Oilers know the starting point for Leon Draisaitl is $12 million. It's the starting point. There is no way around it. And the way you know that is that Elias Pettersson got $11.6 million. And I am very fond of Elias Pettersson's game. I think he's a very good player. I think he definitely can still even get better too, because he's a little bit younger and still kind of feeling himself out. And the Canucks emerging as contenders will only help his cause. But Draisaitl is 28 years old right now. He will be 29 years old next summer when that new contract goes into effect. At minimum, he's getting 12 million. I think if the Oilers can get him for anything less than 13 million, that's great. I think there is a chance that Leon Draisaitl might want to take the Austin Matthews route of let's go 4 or 5 years. And then 4 or 5 years from now, when the cap is crazy, I might be able to get another big contract. If I stay here in Edmonton, I'm going to put up good numbers. Some desperate team might be more willing to offer me money, but that's where it starts to get interesting because there's a trade-off. Well, I can get more money somewhere else, but is the team going to be as good? Can I play with Connor? Can I play with Hyman and Bouchard? And that's really where you get into what matters to these guys. And it's really difficult to know what matters to these guys. You're going to assume Draisaitl likes his situation in Edmonton, that his friendship with Connor is going to be part of this, and that maybe there's a gentleman's agreement between the two parties of, well, I'll take a little bit less if you take a little bit less so we can both stay and we can keep trying to make the team better. But they don't have to do that. They don't owe the Oilers anything. They could very easily say, I want as much money as I possibly can get. And Connor's going to reset the market again. Draisaitl is going to get this extension at some point in the next 12 months. And then Connor's going to run it back. Connor's going to do the same thing next summer, where he's going to go to the top of the line. Right now, the highest paid player is $13.25 million, and that's Austin Matthews. If you wanted to go the full 15% of the salary cap for that year, you're going to say he's making he's going to be making $13.8 million, would be 14% of the estimated $92 million for the salary cap next year. But we're going to talk more about Connor and Leon's valuations in the next segment. So before we get out of here for the second segment, you got to think about this in terms of risk. If you are the Oilers, you're doing everything you can to keep McDavid and Draisaitl and Bouchard, and you'll figure out the rest. And you can box yourself into a corner doing this. You can run into a situation where you're kind of like the Maple Leafs or the Rangers, where you have too much of your cap tied up in too few of your players. And it's because it's only a few guys who are making all the money, it's really hard to readjust your roster. It's really hard to create cap flexibility because if you subtract a superstar talent, as much as Leafs fans might be saying, we got to get rid of Marner, you're not replacing Mitch Marner. You're going to replace like 70% of his production and you might be able to get some more cap flexibility, but you're losing one of the 20 best players in the world to do that. And doing that makes your team worse. So there is a real trade-off. But that'll do it for this second segment of Locked On Oilers. So be sure to stick around where we're going to talk about Connor and Leon's valuations coming up next. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But now that the playoffs are over, we have fewer games, and the sports are not sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with the Booster Bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. If you were so interested, you can get the Oilers at 8.5 to 1 to win the Stanley Cup. If you think the Florida Panthers are going to go back to back, you can get them at 10 to 1. You can get the Devils, Avalanche, and Dallas Stars all at 11 to 1. You can get the Vegas Golden Knights 14 to 1, as well as the Hurricanes. The Leafs are checking in at 15 to 1. The Rangers 15 to 1. The Lightning 17 to 1. The Canucks, if you want a long shot, you can get the Vancouver Canucks 23 to 1 to win the Stanley Cup for the first time in their history. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you to everybody who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers in the dog days of summer. It's a hot one here in the Northeast, recording a little bit earlier on Monday than I usually do, going to Green Day tonight at Citi Field, which be fun, good for my inner kid. But as far as the Oilers, as far as Connor, as far as Leon, you have to look at the other contracts that have been out there for the last round of star players. If Elias Pettersson, who has less on his resume than both of these guys, is getting 11.6, it's very clear Leon's getting at least 12, unless he's willing to take a massive discount. If he's willing to take a big discount, okay. But you have to pencil him in 12 million minimum. I think there's a good chance he's close to McKinnon. I think there's a chance he clears Nathan McKinnon based on the logic of the salary cap continuing to rise year over year. But because of that, you're going to have to make concessions other places in your lineup. And this is why last week we talked about why it was so important that the Oilers really nail their draft. Because going forward, you are going to need a fourth defenseman. You are going to need a ninth forward. And you can only afford those guys on a Stanley Cup contender if they're a veteran taking like the minimum, like a Corey Perry type, or if you're able to graduate guys from your AHL affiliate up to your NHL roster because they're going to be making less money. And that's how you maintain a sustained window of success. You look at the teams over the last handful of years to find success. They were able to parlay guys on cheap contracts, except Florida. Florida's a little bit different, but that's an outlier situation there. They were able to build a good chunk of their rosters through trades and free agency because they were willing to tolerate the risk. A lot of teams would not be willing to tolerate the type of risk Florida did in assembling their roster. Trading for Matthew Tkachuk and giving him that massive extension coming off of a year where he played on one of the best lines in all of hockey. They believed that that was legitimate, that it wasn't a product of his environment. And they've been rewarded two years in a row. Tkachuk has been one of the best players in the entire league. Great two-way defensive impacts. But when you think about it, you're going to have to assume that McDavid and Draisaitl together are going to be making at least $25, $26 million. You throw Darnell Nurse in there at his $9 million. If it's 26, that's 35. If it's 25, that's 34. If you're talking 34 million for three players, then you add Hyman, that gets you up to almost 40. You add Evander Kane, that's 45. The Bouchard contract is likely going to be at least $9 million. You're at 60 million with six guys. You're at more than half of your cap with six guys. And they have guys who are on good contracts. Hyman and Nugent-Hopkins are pretty cheap. Bouchard, whenever they figure out his RFA deal, is going to be pretty cheap because he's on that bridge. But the longer you are competitive, the harder it is to say a Stanley Cup contender, because your good players are going to want to go somewhere else to get more money, to get more playing time. And I reference it frequently, but the Lightning, man, you lose Killorn and Palat, you lose McDonough, you lose like Ross Colton, I couldn't think of his name. You lose those guys over an extended period of time. They had to get rid of Sergachev and Stamkos in one offseason. And to replace them, they brought in 34-year-old Ryan McDonough and Jake Gensel. I think Jake Gensel, as currently constituted in 2024, is a better player than Steven Stamkos, but they had to make concessions. You had to say, well, we can't afford this, so how are we going to approach it? Well, we're going to trade for Brandon Hagel. We're going to trade for Tanner Jeannot. We're going to try and facsimile our way to contender status. And that's why it is so essential that Stan Bowman and the Oilers really nail these contracts. And this was not a strong suit of Stan Bowman's in Chicago, was negotiating contracts, whether the Kane and Taves deals, way too long, the Seth Jones deal, the Marc-Andre Fleury contract, you add that money up very quickly. The quickest way to close your window is to lose your liquidity. As soon as you are up against that ceiling, and then you're trying to graduate guys from bottom six to top six, and they say, well, I need to go somewhere else if I want to get paid. You look at Blake Coleman, you look at Barclay Goodrow. Those types of guys on entry level and bridge deals are great. You get Blake Coleman for $3 million a year. That's awesome. You get Blake Coleman for $5.5 or $6 million a year. It's a little more difficult to make work. And that's kind of the boat the Oilers are in right now, where they're not going to be able to add free agents of consequence anymore, basically. They're going to have to continue to take guys who want to take less money, like a Jeff Skinner, or want to prove it, like Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner, of, okay, I can go to a good team for 1 year. I can play my way into some good stats. That'll get me paid. I estimate Connor McDavid's going to reset the market. Connor McDavid is going to ask for at least $14 million per year. I imagine Leon Draisaitl is going to ask for $12.5 to $13 million per year. If you're at $26 million for two players, there is no room for error in the rest of your roster. As good as Connor McDavid and as good as Leon Draisaitl are, you do have to play other guys, and they can't play the entire game. And the bigger your drop off from your top six to your middle six to your bottom six, the harder it is in the playoffs, because that's really what separates the great teams. Is the less fall off you have in your lineup, the more consistent your effort, your intensity, and your play is. As the game goes along, you can start to wear the other team down. And you saw Florida do this. And Florida, arguably not as talented. Deeper, sure. But overall talent, I think you can make a case the Oilers are a more talented team. If you did the dodgeball analogy, you just lined up both teams. You're taking McDavid. You're probably going to take Draisaitl. Then you take Barkov. Would you take Bouchard, Forsling, Tkachuk? it starts to become a conversation. But I think overall the Oilers are a bit more talented. With that in mind, this will be the defining moves of Stan Bowman's tenure in Edmonton, and he's been on the job a week. Whatever they end up doing with Draisaitl and McDavid money-wise is going to put them in one of two positions where they're either going to be in a Bruins-type situation where they can keep re-racking around those guys the way they did around Bergeron and Marchand, or you're going to end up in a Leaf situation where you continue needing to prune your roster. You lose good but not great players. They go to other places and they get paid. That's the conundrum if you are a great team in such a stark cap environment. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. But before we get out of here, thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. Now go check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NHL in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you could be so kind, if you are listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you are listening to Locked On Oilers on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, join the community. It's a fun time. Even in the dog days of summer, we're making Oilers hockey interesting. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.